Hey folks, Matt Easton here, Scholar Gladiator, and today we're going to talk about going clubbing with your musket. So I've spoken about the use of bayonets quite a lot on this channel, and you all know what a bayonet is. It fits on the end of your musket or rifle, and it turns your firearm, your long arm, into basically something akin to a spear, although as I've mentioned before, it's not as nimble and light as a spear, it's not as long as a spear. It is nevertheless fundamentally like a very heavy spear. But what I haven't spoken that much about, amazingly for this channel, is the butt. And I've talked about the fact that in bayonet fighting, assuming this had a bayonet on it, which incidentally it doesn't because I'm going to use it in a different way in a second. But if you imagine it's got a bayonet on the end, you're predominantly using the pointy end of the weapon. If your point gets knocked aside, pushed aside, parried aside, or whatever, then you do have the butt in which is capable of hitting from a number of different angles, downwards, sideways, upwards in fact. And the butt used in this conventional grip is very versatile. It can strike from a number of different angles, not just the kind of Hollywood roundhouse like this, but it can also come downwards from above. Okay, it can come around like that. So say for example, you thrust at someone and someone pushed the point of your musket down, you could clunk them over the top with the from downwards by bringing it over like that. And indeed you can bring the back foot through if you need to get closer in order to reach them with that. But additionally, as Hutton points out, for example, if your point ends up being pushed upwards, you can clunk them in the nuts with your butt from underneath or anywhere else in the chin or wherever. So the butt's very versatile in that sense. But what we're talking about here is actually a clubbed musket. So some of you will be very familiar with this term, some of you may have never heard it before. So to club a musket means literally once you have fired it, bang, to now turn it into a whopping great club. Now, there are a few things I want to say about this. First of all, this was something that was done, for example, in the English Civil War before the use of bayonets. So plug bayonets, that is a bayonet that you literally ram into the end of the barrel after the gun's been fired, came around in the second half of the 17th century, the later 17th century, and they weren't really common until the end of the 17th century. The socket bayonet is a little bit later than that. It's kind of basically the 1700s. So you're talking about the early 18th century, and so therefore the use of the musket as a weapon of defence was born of necessity, because before you had a bayonet that you could either plug into or attach to the end of your firearm, sometimes you might be attacked, and what you've got in your hands is this. Now, indeed, musketeers, as famously portrayed in numerous movies, musketeers did very often, in fact usually, carry a sword of some kind. That being said, you don't always have time to get your sword out, and some of the swords that they were issued weren't very good. Maybe some of them didn't really have faith in their swords, whatever. And so for numerous reasons, they did end up using firearms as essentially polearms. Now, when you use this as a polearm, the one thing I really want to impress upon you is that it's heavy. If we're talking about medieval polearms, then something like a halberd weighs about 5 pounds. Something like a poleaxe weighs about 6 or 7 pounds. And at tops, we're talking about maybe at the top end of polearms, usually about 8 pounds for a really heavy polearm. So we're talking about a range between sword weight range-ish, so kind of 4 pounds, right the way, or even for a spear even lighter, 2 or 3 pounds, right the way up to about 8 pounds. But these muskets and rifles are heavier than that. They weigh above 8 pounds almost always. They're usually 8 to 10 pounds. So they're really, really heavy objects. This is about 9 pounds, I think. So they're very, very heavy objects, and clearly they are designed for firing, for shooting. They're not designed for hitting people with, for a number of reasons, but one of those being that they're very, very cumbersome. Can you swing this at someone in a number of directions? So you could hit them with that way, or you could hit them with that way. And yes, this is possibly where the gunstock club comes from in Native American tribes as a tribal weapon. But yes, you could absolutely hit someone really, really hard with one of these and completely put them out of action. You could kill them probably with one blow if you hit them in the right place, in the neck or the head with one of these. but they are slow to swing, okay? Once they get the speed up, just check behind me, once they get the speed up, yes, absolutely, they're going to be traveling fast. But to get to the point of getting able to swing them, getting them switched around in your hand, even if you're ready already, actually accelerating them to that point is quite slow and cumbersome. And not only that, but once you've swung, if you miss or if you're blocked, if the person steps out of the way, you're now horribly overbalanced, and it's quite difficult to bring such a cumbersome weapon around for another strike, or indeed if someone strikes at you. So clearly you've got several ways you could grip this. You could grip this with the hands further apart, or you could grip them with the hands closer together. And some of you might be thinking, can you just hit with this end? Well, you could do, yes. Clubbed muskets traditionally were turned around and hit with the butt end, but yes, indeed, I know of one historical account from the mid-19th century where it actually describes someone hitting with the barrel of their rifle, in that case, an Enfield rifle, onto someone's sword arm, I believe it was. So yeah, absolutely, you could hit with this end, absolutely, but clubbed muskets traditionally hit with the butt end. So it's a very cumbersome, slow weapon, and as I was saying, whilst you could have the hands apart or you could have them together, if you're trying to defend yourself with one of these things, it's not very convenient if you switched around to one of these grips for striking with. It's quite a cumbersome weapon to block with. If someone swings their clubbed musket at you, well, then you're on equal terms, I suppose, and you're going to see that big swing coming in. Yes, you could absolutely just stick the thing in the way, either with the hands close together or the hands further apart, so blocking between the hands or blocking above, or in some cases perhaps even below the hands. Absolutely, you could block a slow-moving object, but if they're doing something like thrusting a bayonet at you or swinging a sword, and bear in mind, if I just grab this sword here, a sword is going to be a very light and nimble object that moves around quickly. If that's moving around and attacking at this type of speed, it's very, very difficult to try and match or defend yourself with one of these. That's the first issue. So they're slow to swing, slow recovery or redirection, slow and cumbersome in defense, but there is another important thing. They've got really very little to protect your hands from attacks with sharp weapons such as swords, because number one, they don't have any hand protection on them, but number two, they're not very long. So most pole weapons don't necessarily explicitly need hand protection, like a hand guard fitted on them, because they are longer than the weapons they're fighting against, like a sword. But with this weapon, whilst it is longer than a sword, it's not got enough length to protect you from the sword blows raining down on your hands. And in fact, even when you're fighting with a bayonet fitted, one of the major dangers is your lead hand getting chopped up. And it's one of the major vulnerabilities of the bayoneteer. So, clubbed muskets, in short, were something that it happened a lot, right the way from the 17th century right the way through to, and well, if we go back, it probably happened a lot in the 15th and 16th centuries when firearms started to come around, but we certainly know it was done a lot in the 17th century when firearms were very widespread, and it was still being done right the way up to the 19th century by some people. So you'll notice I don't have a bayonet fitted. I have mentioned this in a couple of previous videos, but just to repeat it, I know of at least one account of a person who had a bayonet fitted trying to club their musket and strike someone with the bayonet fitted, and you can imagine that leads to not very good things for the person swinging the clubbed musket. So generally speaking, clubbed muskets were used that way when there wasn't a bayonet available. If you've got a bayonet, well, use the damn bayonet. That's what that's for. It's a much more effective weapon with a bayonet on it. Clubbed muskets. So, yes, they can hit incredibly hard. They're very powerful swings. I won't look here at how to deal with them or how to defend against them, but you can imagine that getting out of the way is a fairly important theme. But very cumbersome. It is not a weapon that is well suited to using as a bludgeoning weapon, and probably in most circumstances using it more as a jab or a small swing from here is probably going to do enough to hurt or disorientate the opponent in order for you to do something else to them. But because humans are humans and humans love to swing big heavy objects when they're really angry or really scared, this was done throughout the period of history in which muskets were used. Thanks for watching. I'll see you really soon on Scholar Gladiatori channel to talk more about my butt perhaps, or maybe a whole different topic. Give us a like and a subscribe, and I'll see you soon for another video. Cheers folks! Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers folks!